My husband claimed, "I'm the reason this marriage works." So I let him prove it. No reminders, no help, no effort. Suddenly, the home he took for granted fell apart, and the love he overlooked slipped away. Now he wants me back, but I've learned to live without him. I still remember the moment that pushed me over the edge. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't a screaming match. It was a single smug comment, delivered over dinner like it was the most obvious truth in the world. "Lauren, let's be real. This marriage works because of me." Trevor said it so casually, like he was talking about the weather. He didn't even glance up from his plate, completely unaware that in that moment, something inside me snapped. I had spent years making our lives run like a well-oiled machine. Handling bills, grocery shopping, managing his schedule, keeping our home together, and somehow balancing it all while making it look effortless. And yet here he was, sitting across from me, acting as if my efforts were invisible. I wanted to argue. I wanted to list every single thing I did that he never noticed. But then I stopped. What was the point? Words never changed anything. He'd nod, half listening, throw in a meaningless, "Yeah, I appreciate you," and move on. Oh, this time I wouldn't explain. This time I'd let him prove it. So I did something I had never done before. I stopped. Completely. The first day nothing changed. Trevor went about his routine, completely oblivious to the quiet rebellion unfolding right under his nose. His breakfast wasn't on the table when he came downstairs, but he just muttered something about waking up late and grabbed a granola bar. The mail sat unopened on the counter, bills tucked inside, deadlines creeping closer, but he barely glanced at it. The sink started filling with dishes, mine conspicuously absent, but he shrugged it off. I watched, waiting, but Trevor didn't notice. Day 2. His work shirt, which was always ironed and ready in the closet, was still crumpled in the laundry basket. He scowled at it but didn't say anything. He had a meeting at 9 a.m., one I had always reminded him about. I said nothing. He overslept. I listened as he cursed under his breath, fumbling to throw on whatever he could find before racing out the door. I smiled to myself. Day 3. The fridge started looking empty. No groceries. No meals prepped. No lunches packed. Trevor rummaged through the cabinets, grumbling. He called me from work, irritation seeping into his voice. "Did you forget to do the shopping?" I let the silence stretch before replying evenly. "Oh, I didn't realize that was my job." Pause. Then a dismissive chuckle. All right, I get it. I'll grab something on the way home." He didn't get it. Not yet. By the end of the first week, the cracks started to show. The house, once spotless, looked like a war zone. Clothes piled up. Junk mail covered the counter. His coffee cup from 3 days ago still sat on the living room table, a ring of dried liquid staining the glass. But the best part? Trevor still hadn't figured it out. He just assumed things were temporarily out of order, not realizing that this was his new reality. Then it happened. The moment I had been waiting for. Saturday morning. His favorite day of the week. The one where he slept in, woke up to fresh coffee, and read his sports articles while I took care of everything. Not today. I sat on the couch, flipping through a book, ignoring the mess around me. Trevor stumbled downstairs, yawning. He blinked at the sink full of dishes. At the empty coffee pot. "Babe?" he called, rubbing his face. You didn't make coffee?" I looked up, feigning innocence. "Nope." His forehead creased. "Oh, right. Well, did you get groceries?" I was thinking pancakes. "No groceries." Silence. He scratched the back of his head. "Right. So, we ordering breakfast?" "We." I raised an eyebrow. He exhaled sharply, walking toward the door. "Fine. I'll pick something up." "Don't forget to check the mail," I called after him. He paused. "Huh." I tilted my head toward the overflowing pile of envelopes. "The bills are due. Thought you might want to handle that." His expression darkened. He ran a hand down his face, clearly trying to stay patient. "Lauren, come on, why are you acting like this?" I smiled. "Like what?" "Like I have to do everything all of a sudden." And there was the realization. The weight of responsibility pressing down on him. I could see it in his face. The quiet panic, the confusion, the how the hell did this all fall apart so fast? Look in his eyes. I shrugged, standing up. "I'm just giving you what you wanted, Trevor. You said you were the reason this marriage works. So, I'm letting you prove it." He opened his mouth to argue, but no words came out. For the first time, he had nothing to say. Over the next few days, things got worse. Trevor missed another work meeting. He forgot to take the trash out, leaving the house smelling awful. He misplaced his car keys, something I usually helped him find, and spent an entire morning turning the house upside down. His coworkers started noticing his stress. His boss made a comment about his lack of organization. His friends teased him about his new life as a bachelor. Meanwhile, I thrived. Without the weight of managing everything, I suddenly had time. Time to read, to relax, to take long walks. Time to focus on myself, on things I had abandoned while playing the role of the perfect wife. And Trevor? He was drowning. The final straw came when he forgot to pay the power bill. I came home that evening to find him sitting in the dark, staring at the blank TV screen like it had personally betrayed him. When I flicked the light switch and nothing happened, I laughed. A real, genuine laugh. Trevor shot me a look. Not funny, Lauren. I smirked. Oh, I don't know. I think it's hilarious. He groaned, rubbing his temples. All right. You've made your point. Can we go back to normal now? I crossed my arms. What's normal, Trevor? Me doing everything while you take the credit. He hesitated. For the first time, I saw real recognition in his eyes. The weight of his own words sinking in. I didn't realize how much you handled, he admitted. No, Trevor. You just never cared to notice. He exhaled, looking away. I messed up, didn't I? I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Because for the first time he knew. And I wasn't sure he could fix it. Trevor sat in the dimly lit room, his face a portrait of realization. The power was out, the house was in chaos, and for the first time in his life he had no one to pick up the slack. He had always assumed that our life functioned effortlessly, never once considering that I had been the force holding it together. Now, with everything crumbling around him, he was beginning to understand. But understanding wasn't enough. He had to experience the full weight of his own words. I wasn't going to stop now. The next morning I left early, leaving Trevor to fend for himself. I didn't offer any explanations. No breakfast, no reminders, no conversation. Just silence. I walked out the door with a sense of freedom I hadn't felt in years, knowing that whatever awaited him that day was entirely his problem. When I returned, the house was a disaster. Dirty dishes had multiplied, papers were strewn across the table, and Trevor was slumped on the couch, looking utterly drained. He glanced up when I walked in, his face hopeful, as if I would finally step in and fix everything. I didn't. Instead, I moved around the house like a guest, taking care of my own needs and nothing else. I made a cup of tea, curled up with a book, and ignored the storm brewing in Trevor's mind. I could feel his eyes on me, waiting for me to say something, to break the unbearable silence. But I had no intention of making this easy for him. That night he hesitated before getting into bed. Usually he would fall asleep instantly, confident that the next day would run as smoothly as the last. But now uncertainty clouded his features. I knew he was struggling, but I wasn't going to relieve him of his burden. By the end of the week, the house was barely functioning. The laundry pile had grown to the point where he had to dig for clean clothes. The fridge was nearly empty, forcing him to survive on takeout and whatever snacks he could find. His work life was spiraling too. He had missed 2 meetings and I overheard him on the phone, making desperate excuses to his boss. But the true unraveling came when he forgot an important client dinner. I was sitting in the living room when I heard the realization hit him like a freight train. He shot up from his chair, eyes wide, frantically searching for his phone. Lauren, did you? He stopped mid-sentence, catching himself. His face paled as he checked the time. The dinner was supposed to start 20 minutes ago. I watched as he scrambled, throwing on a wrinkled shirt, mumbling a string of curses under his breath. He barely acknowledged me as he rushed out the door. Hours later, he returned looking completely defeated. He dropped his keys on the table, exhaled deeply, and sat down across from me. I completely blew it, he admitted, rubbing his hands over his face. The client walked out. I had no idea what to say. I wasn't prepared. I sipped my tea waiting. I didn't realize how much you kept track of things, he continued, his voice softer now. I always thought it just happened. For the first time he was acknowledging my role. But he wasn't broken enough yet. I leaned forward slightly, my expression unreadable. You wanted to prove that you were the reason this marriage worked. How's that going? He flinched at my words. He had no answer. The next day I decided to take things a step further. If Trevor wanted to believe that he could handle everything, I was going to let him experience the full extent of his responsibilities. I stopped paying the bills. At first he didn't notice. Days passed and life continued to be a mess, but he assumed that things would somehow sort themselves out. He believed that just because a problem wasn't immediately visible, it didn't exist. Then one morning his phone buzzed with a notification. I watched from across the room as he read it, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm. Why is the internet shut off? I shrugged. Probably because the bill wasn't paid. His eyes darted to me. You always handle that. Not anymore. Panic flickered in his gaze. He grabbed his laptop, tried to use his phone as a hotspot, but his data had run out. This is ridiculous, he muttered. I didn't respond. I simply got up, grabbed my bag and left for the day. That evening when I returned, I found him surrounded by overdue notices. The electricity bill, the gas bill, the car insurance. All of them sitting in a stack he hadn't bothered to open until now. His leg bounced anxiously as he calculated the late fees. He looked up at me, frustration clear on his face. Why didn't you remind me? I tilted my head. You're the reason this marriage works, remember? Trevor didn't answer. That night I heard him tossing and turning in bed. The weight of responsibility was settling in, pressing down on him in a way he had never experienced before. The next morning he was up early, paying bills, sorting through the chaos he had let pile up. I could see it happening, the cracks deepening, the arrogance fading. He was starting to understand. But I wasn't done yet. The final test came when he got a call from his mother. Trevor, sweetheart, why didn't you remind me about my doctor's appointment? She asked, her voice slightly concerned. You always check in on me beforehand. His jaw tightened. I saw the moment it hit him, that I had been the one reminding him all these years. That I had kept track of not only our life but his family's too. He barely managed to stammer out an apology before hanging up. When he turned to me there was no defensiveness, no excuses. Just quiet realization. I really messed up, didn't I? He admitted. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. You finally seeing it? He swallowed hard, nodding. Trevor was unraveling. His carefully curated image of the husband who had it all together was gone, replaced by a man who had been utterly lost without me. The weight of reality had crushed him, and for the first time he truly understood what I had been carrying all these years. But the question was, did he really want to change? Or was this just panic? I wasn't going to make this easy for him. Because for the first time in a long time I had nothing to lose. Trevor had always been composed, the type to handle himself with an air of effortless control. But that image was shattering piece by piece. The house had become a reflection of his unraveling, disorder creeping into every corner, the walls closing in on him. His once meticulously planned days had turned into an endless cycle of forgotten obligations, missed deadlines and last-minute scrambles. I watched from the sidelines, silently observing his descent into the chaos he had once claimed never touched him. It wasn't just about laundry piling up or unpaid bills anymore. His world was crumbling in ways he never anticipated. One morning he woke up late, something that never used to happen. His alarm blared for nearly 10 minutes before he jolted awake, disoriented and panicked. The crisp shirts he usually wore to work were either wrinkled or buried under a heap of neglected clothes. He grabbed the least offensive option, barely having time to brush his hair before bolting out the door. An hour later I got a call. Lauren, where's my laptop charger? His voice was tense, bordering on desperation. Wherever you left it last, I replied evenly. Come on, I don't have time for this, he snapped, frustration spilling through the phone. Neither do I said before hanging up. Trevor had never really understood the weight of the responsibilities I carried, and now he was drowning under them. By lunchtime he had forgotten to eat. I knew because he came home early, rummaging through the empty fridge, eyes darting around like a man who had lost his sense of direction. You didn't go grocery shopping? He asked, trying to mask the disappointment in his tone. Did you? His jaw tightened. He knew the answer. The days blurred together and his mounting stress became more visible. He started forgetting things. Small details that once seemed insignificant but now had massive consequences. A missed meeting led to an angry client. A misplaced document sent his boss into a spiral of discontent. His emails stacked up, unread, because he no longer had the mental space to keep track of everything. Then came the day he hit his breaking point. Trevor had an important presentation, one that could define the trajectory of his career. He had worked on it for weeks, or at least he thought he had. In reality, he had barely been able to keep up with the daily chaos, let alone prepare something substantial. He left early that morning, his face tight with nerves, muttering something about getting to the office early to finalize the details. That night, he returned looking like he had been physically drained. He walked in, threw his keys on the counter, and just stood there staring into the void. "How did it go?" I asked, feigning curiosity. He let out a hollow laugh. "Disaster. Absolute disaster." "What happened?" He ran a hand down his face. "I wasn't ready. The slides were a mess. I forgot key points. My boss could barely look at me by the end of it." He sank into the chair across from me, rubbing his temples. I could see it. The slow, painful realization that he had taken everything for granted. "I never knew how much you did," he admitted, his voice quieter than before. I let the words hang in the air, offering him no reassurance, no comfort. Because this wasn't about validation. It was about understanding. The unraveling didn't stop there. The next morning, he was supposed to meet a friend for coffee, something he had arranged weeks ago. But when his friend called asking where he was, Trevor's face drained of color. He had completely forgotten. No reminders. No calendar alerts. Just an empty promise he had made and failed to keep. His friendships, once solid, were beginning to show cracks. His colleagues had started to notice his distracted behavior, his inability to keep up with the pace he once prided himself on. And then the ultimate humiliation came. Trevor had always been well put together, never the type to appear anything less than composed in public. But when he arrived at work one morning wearing mismatched shoes, his coworkers barely contained their laughter. He had left in such a hurry that he hadn't noticed. When he came home that evening, he tossed the shoes into the corner and collapsed onto the couch. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "What is?" "Everything. I feel like my entire life is falling apart." "That's because it is." He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "I don't get it. How did you do all of this? How did you keep track of everything and still make it look easy?" I looked at him, really looked at him. The man who had once bragged about being the backbone of this marriage was now barely holding himself together. "It wasn't easy, Trevor. You just never had to see the effort it took." He didn't respond. There was nothing he could say. The chaos he had once dismissed as a minor inconvenience had consumed him. The responsibilities he believed were insignificant had nearly broken him. The marriage he thought he controlled was slipping through his fingers. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty watching it happen. Because this wasn't about revenge. It was about revelation. Trevor had spent years taking me for granted, assuming that the structure of our life existed naturally without effort. But now, with nothing shielding him from the reality of what I had done for us, he had no choice but to face the truth. But understanding wasn't enough. The question was he willing to change? And if he did, would it even matter? Because something in me had already begun to shift. And I wasn't sure I could go back. Trevor had always prided himself on being the composed, put-together man. He carried himself with an air of confidence, the kind that made people believe he had his life in order. But that image was slipping, and fast. No matter how hard he tried to conceal the mess brewing inside our home, the cracks were becoming too wide to ignore. The people around him were starting to see what I had known for years. He wasn't nearly as capable as he believed. It started subtly. The forgotten appointments, the rushed excuses, the way he constantly seemed one step behind. At first, he chalked it up to being overwhelmed, brushing off his disorganization with a forced laugh. But I could see the shift happening. He was unraveling in real time, and the world around him was beginning to notice. One evening, we attended a dinner with some of his colleagues, an event he usually looked forward to. He thrived in these settings, always the charismatic one, effortlessly steering conversations, earning approving nods from his peers. But that night something was off. His suit, usually crisp and tailored to perfection, was wrinkled, as if he had pulled it out of the laundry basket at the last minute. His tie was slightly crooked, a small but telling detail that screamed he was out of sync. The moment we walked in, I felt the shift. People noticed. The usual gleam in his eyes was dulled by exhaustion, his charm muted by the stress he had been drowning in. When someone asked about a report he was supposed to submit, he hesitated. A brief pause that normally wouldn't have meant much but in this setting spoke volumes. "Oh right," he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's in progress. I've just had a lot going on lately." A polite chuckle followed, but the questioning glances lingered. These were the same people who had always seen him as sharp, reliable. Now they were starting to wonder. The conversation shifted and I let him struggle through it, offering no lifeline. It wasn't out of malice. It was necessary. He had spent years dismissing my contributions, claiming he was the backbone of our marriage. Now he was standing on that belief alone and it was crumbling beneath him. But that was only the beginning. The real blow came during a gathering at his parents' house. His mother, always keen on keeping up appearances, had invited a mix of family friends and distant relatives, the kind of people who thrived on gossip. Trevor, already worn thin, was trying desperately to maintain the illusion that everything was fine. It fell apart spectacularly. Halfway through the evening, his mother pulled me aside. Her smile was pleasant, but her voice held an edge of concern. "Lauren, is Trevor okay? He's been so distracted lately. And he looks tired." I held her gaze, debating whether to shield him or let the truth settle in. In the end, I simply said, "He's handling a lot right now." I didn't need to elaborate. She had already noticed. And so had everyone else. As the night went on, Trevor grew more agitated. He snapped at his sister for a harmless joke, then spent too long staring at his phone, pretending to be busy. It was unlike him. He was usually the life of these gatherings, making people laugh, carrying conversations with ease. But that night he was a shadow of himself. The final blow came when his uncle, a blunt man with little patience for pretense, clapped him on the shoulder and said, "Son, you look like you haven't slept in weeks. Work running you ragged." Trevor forced a laugh, but it lacked conviction. "Something like that. Maybe you need to take a break. Get yourself together," his uncle added, not realizing how deep the words cut. Trevor clenched his jaw, nodding absently. But I saw it. The way his fingers tightened around his glass, the flicker of something dangerously close to defeat in his eyes. Later that night, after we returned home, he finally cracked. He paced the living room, his frustration spilling over. "Did you hear them? The way they were looking at me? Like I'm some mess who can't handle his own life." I sat back on the couch, arms crossed. "Maybe because that's exactly what's happening." His eyes snapped to mine. "You think this is funny?" "No," I said evenly. "I think it's ironic." He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "This isn't fair, Lauren. I've just been off my game lately. That's all." "Lately?" I echoed, raising an eyebrow. "Try since the moment I stopped picking up the pieces for you." He looked away, shaking his head, but he couldn't argue. He knew I was right. Silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken truths. For the first time, Trevor was experiencing what it felt like to carry the full weight of responsibility. No shortcuts. No safety nets. Just him standing in the wreckage of his own making. "I didn't think it would be this hard," he admitted quietly. I studied him, wondering if this was finally the moment that would change things. But then he sighed, shaking his head as if willing himself to push the thoughts away. "I just need to get back on track," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "Fix things. Get control again." And there was. He still thought this was something temporary, something he could fix like a problem at work. He didn't realize that the foundation itself had been flawed all along. I stood up, my voice calm but firm. "Trevor, this isn't about getting back on track. This is about realizing that track never existed without me holding it together." He swallowed hard, his posture tense. I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked away, leaving him standing in the middle of the mess he had created, both in our home and in our marriage. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if I even cared whether he figured it out. The moment I walked away from Trevor that night, something inside me shifted. I had spent so many years carrying the weight of our life together, always making sure things ran smoothly, always picking up the pieces. But now, standing on the other side of his unraveling, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: relief. For the first time, I wasn't the one scrambling to fix everything. I wasn't the one smoothing over his mistakes or cushioning his falls. I was just existing, and it felt liberating. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise, but instead of jumping out of bed to prepare for the day, I stayed there, staring at the ceiling. The usual urgency I had lived with for years was gone. There was no rush to check the calendar, no list of responsibilities waiting for me. Trevor, on the other hand, was already up, muttering to himself in frustration as he rummaged through drawers. His usual routine was in complete disarray. I didn't offer to help. Instead, I made myself a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the early morning light seep through the blinds. It was peaceful. For once, my mind wasn't cluttered with everything that needed to be done for him. By mid-morning, I found myself rediscovering small joys I had long abandoned. I picked up a book I had meant to read for years. I went for a walk, breathing in the crisp air, enjoying the sound of my footsteps on the pavement. I stopped by a cafe I used to love before marriage had consumed all my free time. I had been so lost in the endless responsibilities of being Trevor's wife that I had forgotten what it felt like to be me. And the more I indulged in this newfound freedom, the less I missed the life I had left behind. Days passed and I found myself making decisions without factoring Trevor into them. I signed up for a painting class. I started eating meals when I was hungry, not when it was convenient for his schedule. I reconnected with friends, people I had unintentionally drifted from because I had been too consumed with running our household. Every step away from my old life felt like a step toward something better, something lighter. Meanwhile, Trevor was still struggling. He was late to work more often than not. His desk, once pristine, had become a reflection of his deteriorating grip on order. Papers scattered, unopened envelopes piling up. He had lost weight, not dramatically but enough that people started noticing. He wasn't sleeping well, his face lined with exhaustion, dark circles forming under his eyes. At first he didn't say much about my newfound independence. But I could tell he felt it. One evening I was getting ready to go out when he finally broke. "Where are you going?" he asked, trying to keep his tone casual, but the edge in his voice was unmistakable. "Out," I replied simply, slipping on my shoes. "With who?" "Friends." He stood there, watching me as I gathered my things, his expression unreadable. "You never used to go out this much," he said after a moment. I shrugged. "I never had the time before." He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "Lauren, what are we doing?" I turned to face him. "What do you mean?" "This," he gestured vaguely between us. "You're acting like we're not even married anymore." I met his gaze, my voice calm. "Are we?" The silence that followed was heavy. For so long our marriage had been defined by my effort. The moment I stopped holding everything together, it all fell apart. And now here we were, standing in the wreckage, realizing that maybe, just maybe, there was nothing left worth saving. Trevor looked away first, his jaw tightening. I didn't think it would get to this point. I sighed, adjusting my bag on my shoulder. Neither did I. And with that, I walked out the door, leaving him standing there, drowning in the realization that I was no longer the woman waiting at home for him. As the weeks passed, I felt myself changing in ways I hadn't expected. I started focusing on my own ambitions, the ones I had put on hold for the sake of our marriage. I took on new challenges, pushed myself beyond the comfortable routine I had settled into for years. I felt sharper, more in tune with myself. And for the first time I wasn't looking back. Trevor, on the other hand, was spiraling. The once confident man who had declared himself the pillar of our marriage was now barely holding himself together. He tried in his own way to bring things back to normal. Small gestures, awkward attempts at conversations, subtle efforts to pull me back into his world. But the problem was, I wasn't sure I wanted to go back. One evening, as I sat on the balcony of my newly rented apartment sipping tea, I received a text from him. "I miss you." I stared at the screen for a long moment, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. A few months ago, those words would have been all I needed to drop everything and rush back. But now, I set my phone aside and took another sip of tea, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. For the first time in a long time, I felt completely at peace. And I wasn't sure Trevor had a place in that peace anymore. The text message sat unread on my screen, glowing softly in the dim light of my apartment. "I miss you." 3 simple words that once had the power to undo me, to pull me back into the orbit of a man who had built his world on the assumption that I would always be there to catch him when he fell. But now they felt like an echo from a life I had left behind. I didn't respond. Not out of cruelty, but because I didn't have an answer. I didn't know if I missed him. I didn't know if there was anything left between us worth salvaging. And more than that, I wasn't sure I wanted to go back to being the woman who had once lived in his shadow, making his life easier while mine faded into the background. Days passed and the messages kept coming. Some were short, "Hey, thinking about you." Others were longer, filled with words I had once longed to hear. "I know I took you for granted. I see it now. Please, can we talk?" I wasn't ready. Then came the voicemail. "Lauren, please. I need to see you. I don't know how to fix this, but I can't stand the way things are. I don't sleep. I don't eat. Work is falling apart and I need to talk to you. Just once. Please." The desperation in his voice was unsettling. Trevor, the man who had once boasted that he was the reason our marriage worked, was now coming undone. And for the first time, it wasn't my responsibility to pick up the pieces. I had a choice. I could ignore him, let him sit with the reality he had created, let him figure out for himself whether he was truly capable of change. Or I could meet him, hear him out, and decide once and for all whether there was anything left between us. I chose the latter. Not for him. For me. When I walked into the cafe, he was already there, sitting in the corner, fidgeting with his coffee cup. He looked different. Thinner, yes, but also smaller, as if the weight of the past few months had pressed down on him until there was nothing left of the man who had once towered over every room he entered. His eyes lit up the moment he saw me, a flicker of hope sparking in the depths of his exhaustion. I didn't rush to fill the silence between us. I let him speak first. "You look good," he said, his voice rough like he hadn't spoken in days. "I feel good," I replied honestly. That seemed to knock the wind out of him. He exhaled slowly, setting his cup down with a shaky hand. "I don't." I waited. "Lauren, He hesitated, then sighed. "I messed up. I know I did. I spent years believing I was the reason things worked between us, and now I see that I was just coasting. You were doing everything and I didn't even notice. And now that you're gone, He swallowed hard. "I don't know how to function without you." I studied him, choosing my words carefully. "That's the problem, Trevor. You don't know how to function without me. But I had to learn how to function without you." He flinched but nodded. "I know. And I hate that it took losing you to see what I had. I hate that I didn't realize sooner. But Lauren, I don't want this to be over. I want to fix things. I just don't know how." I sipped my coffee, letting his words settle. Once, I would have melted at the sincerity in his voice. But now I needed more than words. "What exactly do you want to fix?" I asked. "Do you want me back because you love me? Or do you want me back because you need someone to make your life easier again?" He looked stricken, like I had struck a nerve he wasn't prepared to face. "I love you," he said quickly, almost too quickly. "Love isn't just words, Trevor," I said softly. "Love is showing up. Love is seeing your partner, valuing them, treating them as an equal. You didn't do that when you had the chance. And now that I've found myself again, I don't know if I can go back to being the woman who spent her life making yours easier." His hands curled into fists on the table, not in anger but in helplessness. "So what does that mean?" he asked. I exhaled, setting my cup down. "It means I need more than an apology. I need to see real change. Not just for a few weeks, not just until you're comfortable again. If you want me in your life, you need to prove that you see me as your partner, not your caretaker. Because I'm not coming back to the life we had before. That's not an option." He nodded slowly, absorbing my words. For once, he wasn't arguing. He wasn't trying to convince me to forgive him instantly. He was just listening. "I don't want to lose you," he admitted. "Then prove it," I said simply. The weeks that followed were unexpected. Trevor didn't flood my phone with messages. He didn't show up at my door demanding a second chance. Instead, he did the one thing I never expected. He started doing the work. He hired a cleaning service, not as a way to win me back, but because he finally admitted he couldn't keep up with the house alone. He started meal prepping, forcing himself to learn how to cook more than just the occasional breakfast. He set reminders for bills, kept a calendar for his appointments, and even, shockingly, started therapy. Not once did he ask me to come back. He let me have my space. He let me exist outside of him. And that was when I realized, maybe, just maybe, he was capable of change. But the question wasn't whether he could change. The question was, did I still want to be with him? Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for him to catch up. I wasn't standing still, hoping he'd become the man I had always needed him to be. I was already moving forward. and I wasn't sure if I wanted to turn back. Trevor was making an effort. A real one. And for the first time, it wasn't just about convincing me to come back. It was about proving to himself that he could stand on his own. He had spent years assuming his world functioned effortlessly because of his own strength. Now, stripped of that illusion, he had been forced to build something real. But was it enough? I watched from a distance, carefully observing his actions without stepping in to fix things for him. He didn't ask me for help anymore, nor did he send long-winded apologies hoping I'd swoop in and make things easier. The man who once rolled his eyes at my planning now had his own calendar, a structured routine, and an awareness of the responsibilities he used to ignore. Yet I wasn't sure if that changed how I felt. One evening he reached out, not with another plea but with a simple message. Dinner? Just a talk. No pressure. It took me an hour to decide. I wasn't afraid of seeing him. I was afraid of what it would mean if I did. Did I want closure? Did I want a second chance? Or was I only going to confirm what I already suspected, that I had outgrown us? I agreed. When I arrived at the restaurant, he was already waiting. Not fidgeting. Not anxiously checking his phone. Just waiting, calm and composed, like he had finally made peace with the fact that he couldn't control the outcome. You look happy, he said as I sat down. I am. He nodded, exhaling slowly. That's good. You deserve to be. We talked, really talked for the first time in months. There was no defensiveness, no justifications. Just honesty. He told me about the nights he lay awake, thinking about how easily he had dismissed my efforts. About how he had always believed love meant providing, but never realized that showing up was just as important as earning a paycheck. I don't want to be that man again, he admitted, his voice steady. Not just for you but for myself. And that was the moment I knew he had truly changed. Not because he was asking for forgiveness, but because he wasn't demanding an answer. I still love you, Lauren, he said quietly. But I know that love isn't enough if I haven't earned back your trust. I swallowed, my heart tightening at his words. So what do you want? He asked. I stared at him, feeling the weight of the choice before me. He had changed, yes, but had I? Could I still be the woman who once built her life around him? Or had I built something better on my own? And more importantly, was I willing to give it up? I stared at Trevor, his question lingering in the space between us like a thread waiting to snap. So what do you want? For so long my choices had revolved around him. My time, my energy, my identity had been woven into the fabric of our marriage, and now for the first time, I had a decision to make that was entirely my own. He had changed. That much was undeniable. The man sitting across from me wasn't the same person who had once taken my presence for granted. He wasn't waiting for me to clean up his mess or step in as the quiet force that kept his life together. He had learned. He had grown. But was that enough? I took a slow breath, measuring the weight of my thoughts before I spoke. I don't know, Trevor. His expression didn't falter, though I could see the flicker of emotion in his eyes. He nodded as if he had expected that answer. I understand. And he did. That was the difference. Before he would have argued. He would have tried to convince me to lay out promises of how things would be different, how he would never take me for granted again. But now he sat still, accepting that he had no control over my decision. I spent so many years making sure you had everything you needed, I said finally, my voice steady but soft. And in doing that, I lost sight of what I needed. I had to leave to find that again. And did you? He asked. I met his gaze. I did. Silence stretched between us, filled not with tension, but with something far heavier, understanding. Trevor exhaled slowly, his hands resting on the table. Then maybe that's what this was all meant to be. I frowned slightly, not expecting him to say that. Maybe we were never supposed to stay the same, he continued, his tone thoughtful. Maybe we were meant to love each other, to learn from each other, but not to hold on so tightly that we kept each other from growing. My chest tightened at his words. There had been a time when I thought love meant enduring no matter what. That staying meant success and leaving meant failure. But now, sitting across from him, I realized that love didn't have to mean holding on at all costs. Sometimes love meant letting go. I will always care about you, Lauren, Trevor said, a faint, sad smile on his lips. But if you're happier without me, I won't stand in your way. Tears pricked my eyes, not out of sadness but because of how far we had come. I don't regret us, I whispered. Neither do I. And just like that, the moment passed. We finished our dinner not as a broken couple grasping at something irreparable, but as two people who had walked a long road together and were now standing at a crossroads, ready to go in separate directions. When we stepped outside, the cool night air wrapped around us. Trevor turned to me, his hands in his pockets, his expression soft but sure. "Goodbye, Lauren." I swallowed, my heart aching in a way I hadn't anticipated. "Goodbye, Trevor." Then without another word we parted ways. As I walked toward my car I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't regret. It wasn't sorrow. It was freedom, the kind that comes when you finally choose yourself. For years I had believed that love meant sacrifice. That to be a good wife I had to put Trevor first, to make our home my priority, to build my world around his needs. But now as I drove away I realized that love, real love, meant something entirely different. Love meant growth. It meant respect. It meant choosing happiness, even when it led you away from the person you once thought you'd spend forever with. And I had finally done that. I had finally chosen me.